Welcome to the HCI family of podcasts. We're your source for personal, professional, and organizational growth and development. We share our own original research, explore industry trends, and interview executives and thought leaders from across the globe. Join us for practitioner-oriented content around all things leadership, HR, talent management, organizational development, and change management. Maximize your personal and organizational potential with the HCI family of podcasts. Sheldon Gilbert, welcome to the conversation today.
Thanks, John. Thanks for having me.
It is a pleasure to be with you. You're joining us from New York. I'm south of Salt Lake City in Utah. And today we're going to be talking about training tech talent from underserved communities. A really great, important topic. I'm excited to drill into your expertise and experience to better understand this issue and how we can better help tap into this talent pool and meet the needs of our organizations. As I start things off today, I just wanted to share Sheldon's bio with everybody. Sheldon Gilbert is committed to addressing some of the more important complex issues facing our world, from racial injustice and environmental destabilization to unregulated scientific developments in genetic engineering and artificial intelligence. He founded PHRa Labs to create new pathways for ensuring employment in the tech economy for people from underserved communities. PHRa Labs is a nonprofit vocational academy that offers free training and job placement in the high-demand sectors of DevOps, SRE, cloud infrastructure computing, and cybersecurity at Fortune 1000 employer partners. Sheldon, anything else you would like to highlight by way of your background or personal context before we dive on in?
No, I think it covers a fair amount of it.
Okay, cool. Well, let's jump right on in. What are your thoughts? Clearly, you've created this academy with this, underserved community need in mind, tech talent specifically. What do you see as the best way to train tech talent from underserved communities so that they're ready to hit the ground running in the workforce?
Yeah. Well, again, thanks for having me, John. I think that the question actually is really germane to more than just people from underserved communities, although they're the ones who are disproportionately more impacted. I think right now, there are a number of two major things, I would say even three major things that are occurring that are very important trends for, that I think is creating a tremendous amount of dislocation in not only in the United States, but also across the world, that I think also are creating opportunity if we approach them the right way. The first is that, obviously, given the rise of the internet, there's been a fundamental shift in how companies conduct themselves in the world with regards to commerce and industry in every single sector, from financial services to transportation to education to healthcare. And so that's also been catalyzed further by the rise of cloud computing. And so you're seeing now that what's so instrumental about cloud, John, is that now companies are effectively saying, are shifting their IT costs from being a fixed operating expense to what's called now a variable expense, or COGS, if you will, cost of goods sold. So now, not unlike what Uber has done for transportation, where you're fractionalizing transportation. You no longer need to have a car. You could just basically rent a car. You could basically just in real time pull out your credit card and your mobile phone, and you're paying for a ride at a point in time from point A to point B, and that's it. Same thing with cloud computing. Companies could now just basically pay for processing, memory, and storage when they need it on demand. Well, the good news is that could create a great deal of sort of economic yield and opportunity. The problem is that there aren't enough of these cloud engineers. There aren't enough of these engineers writ large. And I think that's emblematic of a lot of other areas in the economy particularly around a lot of jobs, the digitization of jobs, particularly around these tech jobs. You're seeing that what's being taught in college, I don't care if we're looking at tech, for example, I don't care if you go into Carnegie Mellon, you have a PhD from Carnegie Mellon or MIT or Caltech, what you've learned there is woefully inadequate for the real world. And it's been largely in a sort of hermetic environment, dealing a lot with theory and so forth, but it's actually, you've never built industrial grade software applications that are resilient, that are scalable, that could withstand cyber attacks. You've never learned that. You've never been in those environments actually doing that. It's like I tell people all the time, to be a concert pianist, you need to basically play the piano many, many times, or to become a surgeon, it requires multiple reps. So it lends itself much more to a vocational-like approach. So one is we're seeing this massive talent gap because our traditional pipelines for training and education have been academic institutions, and that gap has been exacerbated over the last 20, 30 years. The second major shift, as we're seeing, is, as we all know, is the cost of education has vastly outpaced the economic utility. And so for a large number of people, they can't even afford to begin to apply to go to those schools. And they're also saddled with intractable debt when they graduate. So it's a really pernicious dynamic that many Americans now find themselves in. And again, people from underserved communities are even more impacted by that, because even the cost of the community colleges is incredibly high, and they're left with intractable debt, and they can't get into certain jobs. Like driving Instacart's not going to be able to pay off those loans and so forth. It's also not a career. And lastly, obviously, I don't think any conversation, John, is relevant without discussing AI, which is causing tremendous amounts of dislocation. But I like to think that, look, it's still to be seen whether or not people, whether these things will replace people. I like to think of this more or less as artificial intelligence, more as augmented intelligence. The idea, and someone said something interesting the other day, which is that we're not going to get replaced by AI, but you're going to get replaced by people who know how to use AI, right?
Yeah.
So this idea that and again, the level of productivity will significantly increase by those who actually know how to use GPT-4, Gemini, or Llama to do a lot of their jobs, whether you're a financial analyst or not, or a surgeon or a pilot. And again, people from underserved communities, they're not availed to those tools. They don't even know how to even begin to leverage a lot of those different things. So those three main things are, I think, reasons why more than ever we need to basically continue to invest in these communities, because there is a massive talent gap. And so to now circle back to your question, that is forcing a recalibration of a number of things, which is, what are the requisite skill sets that I need? If I need to hire someone, if I'm JP Morgan Chase, or I'm Nike, or I'm Tesla, what am I looking for? It's likely not a degree, John. It's a set of skills that you.
Let's tap into that, because absolutely, we need tangible skills for people to be able to hit the ground running, go into jobs, and be able to start from day one and make a contribution. As you highlighted, often university programs that aren't more vocational in nature aren't preparing students with that skill set. They're preparing them with kind of a different skill set. So what specifically are those skills that you see that employers are looking for in tech talent today?
Yeah, so exactly. So there are a number of things. When a company, I don't care whatever job it may be in the world, there are only two questions I tell people all the time, the most consequential questions that an employer is trying to get the answer to when they're interviewing you. And John, again, this could be any industry. The first question is, do you know how to use a particular tool? Do you know how to use Excel? Do you know how to use Docker? Do you know how to use Python? Writing for loops? Do you know how to use something, a particular tool? But 60, 70% of people probably could answer that first question. And particularly if they watch YouTube, they feel that they're not proficient, they can answer that question. The second question is the most consequential question, which is where the music stops for a lot of people, which is like, that's great, John. Happy that you know how to use Excel. Tell me, can you tell me about 7 or 8 financial models, NPV models, or cash flow or balance sheet models that you created across 3 different industries? And that's where the music stops. You actually can't speak to the functional application of those tools in a particular business case scenario that you've done multiple times. And that's the problem. So companies are looking for people. Look, it's not that it's congratulations, you actually know how to write conditional loops, whether they're for loops or while loops in Python. That's great. The question is, where am I applying that? What are you doing? What they're looking for are people who actually know how to extract information, process information quickly, and leverage that information. So the question more like, do you know how to connect to this particular endpoint? Do you know how to use a REST API? Do you know how to actually now access the JSON file, extract the data, and then load it into a business intelligence report that has to be sent out every 15 hours to people on staff? There's a whole functional workflow that people actually aren't even aware of. And this is really what employers are hiring for. It is the application of Golang, Postgres, EMR, MapReduce within discrete functional workloads. And so if you actually take those workloads and you deconstruct that, it is understanding the workloads, the business objectives, and the particular technologies that are being used to solve those functional workloads. So there's been an orientation to teaching people the tool, but not teaching the people about the application of the tools. Again, it's like teaching people about Excel. That's great. You know all the formulas in Excel. What am I applying Excel for? Am I using it to do a particular machine learning algorithm or a regression algorithm? Or am I using it to do a discounted cash flow model? What am I using Excel? What problem am I solving? And so the orientation has to be around the discrete skill sets to solve these problems, not only just technically, but also how do you actually work in a team to be able to identify a particular problem, scope it the right way, develop an execution timeline, or even when you're stuck with a problem, how do you actually escalate that up the decision chain to say, look, we're stuck here. Maybe we're approaching it the wrong way. How do you, meet with your manager or your team to actually do so, particularly in a hybrid or remote environment where those skill sets are that much more important, centered around collaboration and solving problems. The other thing I'd say about that, by the way, is that when you actually look about consider the fact that now GPT-4, Gemini, they can actually write all those conditional loops, all this code.
Right.
That changes the game now. So the question becomes, now they're looking, I tell people all the time, now companies, instead of having 10 engineers build an application, John, they're probably not going to have 7 engineers. And those 7 engineers know how to use those AI tools to increase their productivity that much more. So it's a different calculus, right? And so how do we get people here is the question, right? It was a part of what you were asking before. How do we do that? The key here, and I like to use this adage, which I just learned recently, but it happens to sort of codify what we're doing. I think you may have heard this before, John, but correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the saying goes, this is about knowledge, about retaining information. They said if you listen to a lecture, you may retain 10% of it. If you read it, you'll retain 20% of it. If you actually do the thing, you'll actually retain 70% of it. If you could teach it, you retain it 90 to 100%. We like to index on the latter portion, which is that we actually, the way that we approach this in training people for cloud infrastructure, for example, the vast majority of our students that we select have no technical background. And by the end of the program, we have about an 80% plus placement rate at Fortune 1000 companies. Starting salary is about 100,000. They're coming from households of 20,000. So within 6 months, we change the economic trajectories of these individuals. How do we do that? We understand what the workloads are that these companies are looking for, and we make sure that our students do extensive repetition of these particular workloads using these particular tools that are needed, whether it's Docker, Kubernetes, Python. So by the time that they actually go and get an interview, John, and the person says, well, that's great that you know how to spell Kubernetes. Can you tell me about 4 or 5 instances where you've actually built applications using Kubernetes? That I've done about 15 deployments. And like, 15 deployments? Really? How did you do that? All right. We basically take 2 or 3 years worth of experience, John, and we collapse that within 6 months. So the only way that you could actually master or develop the proficiency using these tools is by doing it so many times that you actually start to break the mechanism. And once you actually break things and you're forced to fix it, that's when the learning truly happens. And so people are not getting any time doing that functional experience. They're not doing it in college. They're not doing it in high school. They're not doing it in grad school because they're not even aware of what the only way that people learn these things is actually on the job, right? And so very few people actually are given the opportunity to go and learn those things on the job.
Can you describe in a few minutes kind of what that model looks like? You described how important it is to get not just the application exposure to know how to use the system, the application to be able to do the thing, but to actually do the thing and implement it, right? So what does your training model at Cura Labs look like that specifically helps people have those 15 iterations that you just described?
Yeah, exactly. It's a good question. So I like to think of this not unlike many other industries where you have like a simulation environment. So if you want to become a pilot, there's a flight simulator. If you want to become a surgeon, there's a sort of a cadaver simulation environment and so forth. The irony is that we're trying to train people for jobs that are all related to cloud infrastructure. The reason why cloud infrastructure is very important is a great demand for these jobs, John, cloud infrastructure. And that when I say cloud infrastructure, that is all these derivative areas, whether it's cybersecurity, DevOps, which is taking software and deploying it onto infrastructure, all aspects too around like machine learning, AI. You need to have infrastructure to make all that fancy code work on top of that, data operations and so forth. So leveraging cloud computing to run all these different various company operations. And so the way that one of the things that's important is that we basically have to get people set up onto these cloud environments. They have these accounts onto various cloud environments. But here's the interesting thing, John, is that these cloud companies, the way they make money is they charge you by the hour to use the different resources. It's a utility system. So there's this interesting dynamic whereby which for most training academies, that becomes prohibitive because one, if I have 15 students and each of them has an account, I actually can't see which resources my students are turning on or off. And more importantly, I can't see when they've turned the resources off. So they basically could be leaving those machines on and have these massive runaway costs. So it becomes prohibitive for a lot of institutions. So what we've decided, we've actually have developed specialized sandboxes, John, where it could basically emulate the infrastructure of any employer, right? And then allows people to actually now train on simulated conditions for any given company, and will control the usage of the system to manage the cost accordingly. So this way now and it could also do automated grading. So not only can all the students get extensive battle experience, right? Real world experience, managing a DDoS attack, seeing when there's a system outage, if there's a flash sale and there's a spike of traffic to the site, learning how to remediate, check the error logs, all those different things, getting real world functional experience within a business context. What is the application? It's a finance application. Finance for what? Is it retail banking? Is it electronic trading platform? It's electronic trading. Okay, great. Do you have to create a low latency system? What is trading across 5 different markets around the world? Are we trying to connect between Jaipur and Luxembourg and Belmopan and Houston? And you have 30 milliseconds to do the trading system. Are the machines fast enough? What's the cost? Trying to understand those business dynamics, because the technology is what's used to drive the various business objectives. And if you could stimulate all those, and then our students are responsible for building these systems, making those systems are resilient. We stress test what they've done, and they do that multiple times under multiple scenarios, considering also all the financial costs as well. You have to do things on time, on budget, and we engage in active conversation. So they're having to always defend their designs, their work, their workloads. They work individually and they work in teams. So we're basically taking 3 years of true commercial industrial activity, and we're collapsing it within 6 months. We're not reinventing the wheel here, brother. This is what's been going on for a long time. It's called vocational training, but more importantly, it's also industrial-based training. And now we're leveraging the technology to make that higher resolution and the shorter time frames, and make it all possible to do simulations.
Yeah, I love that. So much about what you're describing, I think, is just ideal given the skills gaps in the workforce. And when you talk about the accessibility of the type of vocational programming you're describing, that just makes it so scalable, and it makes it accessible to diverse populations. And like you said at the very outset, like what you're describing could apply to anybody, right? It could apply to anyone from any background, but it's particularly helpful for those who come from disadvantaged backgrounds, because it provides greater
playing field.
Exactly. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, Sheldon, I note the time. I think we could go on for a really long time. As we start to wrap up, I would love to just have you share with the audience how they can connect with you, find out more about your work, your team, how they can get plugged in to this
Yeah.
vocational training approach, and then give us the final word, kind of your final pitch for why this is so important and why people should pay attention to this.
Yes. So thanks again, John, for having me on. This is great. Love to, come back anytime you want to chat some more. I think we're just scratching the surface, as you mentioned. So
Yeah.
best way of reaching me is Sheldon, SHELDON, at KURA, KURALABS, KURALabs.org. So that's my email address, and our organization is called KURALabs.org. We are starting to actually recruit for our fifth cohort. We're entering a fifth year. We're particularly proud of the fact that in less than 4 years, we've trained and placed over 100 engineers, and we generate over $12 million in new wages. And we're particularly proud of it. In fact, we have a number of fantastic supporters, but also Mackenzie Scott, we received an award from her. So we're really encouraged by that level of support. Now, John, the thing I'd say is this, which is that there is a very significant disconnect, unfortunately, between the traditional sources of learning and education, and largely one of I think the remits of academia has always been to train people to be productive members of society and productive citizens, and also that means employment, right? That model is at a tipping point where, again, as I mentioned before, the cost of education has vastly outpaced its economic utility. So that is a model that has to be resorted. On the other side of that equation, my friend, we actually have employers that are literally existential is I think, an appropriate term to use right now, given the emergence of generative AI. Every company across every industry is trying to understand, will I be replaced by this thing? Will I be fundamentally dislocated by this thing? Or will this be a catalyst for increased productivity? They don't know. What I will tell you is there are two things that these companies are trying to figure out, industries trying to figure out, governments trying to figure out, which is, I'm likely have to rethink my talent pool. That means that I have to think of bringing in a new wave of people with these skills, or I'm going to take my existing people and retrain them with those skills. Those two are inevitable. And I think this impacts nearly everyone, and in particular those from underserved communities, because oftentimes they're the ones who are disproportionately impacted. They are availed to these resources later. They tend to be more expensive, and this that sort of echo chamber, if you will, that sort of disconnect impacts all of us. And so what we're doing is we're actually flipping the model around. We're actually using the most advanced technology to level that playing field and allow everyone to get true functional experience and using these technologies, so much so that by the time they show up for the interview, chances are they may understand the technologies better than employers.
Well said, Sheldon. Again, this has just been a fascinating conversation. We've just scratched the surface, which means anyone who's listening or watching really needs to reach out to Sheldon to find out more. I want to encourage everyone to reach out, get connected, find out more about what Sheldon and his team can do for you. And as always, I hope everyone can stay healthy and safe, that you can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day. And I hope you all have a great week. Thanks for joining us for this episode of the podcast. We hope you stay healthy and safe, and please join us again soon.